Welcome to this week's Master Coaches Weekly Buzz, hosted by John Foreman. We continue to update our viewers on the most current issues of collegiate volleyball and junior club volleyball, the trends with the new women's professional volleyball leagues, and the leaders in sports conversations, and our most recent conversation with Sharon Clark, AVCA president, who shared with what this fall season might look like for women's collegiate volleyball. Now, let's go to former Olympic coach Mick Haley, who will introduce our special guest today. Mick?
Well, it's my pleasure, Ruth, to introduce Wade Garard, who is the current co-founder and CEO of First Point Volleyball Foundation. Wade, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mick, and everyone for having me.
Yeah, we're real interested to find out exactly what First Point is and really what are you guys up to here?
Sure. Well, First Point Volleyball Foundation is a nonprofit that I founded along with John Speraw back in December of 2016, and we are growing boys and men's volleyball in America. We are in the opportunity business, essentially. We think people grow and mature through the sport of volleyball, and we'd like to provide more opportunities at every level of the game for people to benefit from our great sport. The thinking is, when we conceived of this back in 2016, is could we double or even triple participation of the amount of boys playing the game over a 10-year period? And we're off to a good start and have learned a lot and are making a big impact. So,
well, not only have you provided more opportunities, but you've also, your foundation has also helped start a number of new programs, collegiately as well as high school. I'm going to throw it to Bob Bertucci. He wants to ask you a little bit about the most latest contribution, and I think one of the most exciting things that the foundation has done. Bob?
Thanks, Mick. And Wade, thank you for agreeing to come on the Master Coaches Weekly Buzz Show.
My pleasure.
You know, for the last 3 years, you know, I know that First Point Volleyball Foundation has made diversity and inclusion a strategic priority initiative. You know, through the chairmanship of Kenny Rogers, you know, who played volleyball, graduated from Princeton. Can you talk about the initiative a bit and why First Point Volleyball Foundation made it a priority?
Sure. And just taking a quick step back, this whole project is not novel. There's been people championing boys volleyball for a long time, but following a study back in 2016 that USAV had commissioned with Doug Beal, getting that kicked off, we asked a whole lot of people about strategic priorities if we were to make a more intentional effort to grow the game, and there were 3 of them. You mentioned diversity and inclusion being one of those. And then the other 2 priorities being collegiate opportunities and particularly scholarship roster opportunities, and then high school boys growth. So those 3 strategic initiatives have guided us. You mentioned Kenny Rogers on our board has chaired the strategic initiative about diversity, had 3 or 4 summits about how we could introduce our sport to more boys of color around the country, now to engage more coaches of color and athletes as well. And those summits led to a series of recommendations. And there's a task force report on that, which I think is interesting. Scott Stowell is another person worth mentioning on our board, who he, along with Maran Jaya, co-chaired our strategic planning process, which arrived at those initiatives. And so saying all that, the context there was then in place to be opportunistic when I got the chance to meet Greg Moore, who is the commissioner of the SIAC conference, an NCAA Division II conference of 14 institutions, mostly in the Southeast, 13 of which are HBCUs, historically black colleges. And Greg and I met in December of 2018 at a conference. The SBGA, the Sports Business Journal, and Learfield have an annual summit every year that I attended. Again, another great example of someone who is as First Point Volleyball Foundation, solely dedicated to being intentional to meet administrators, introduce college athletics directors and commissioners to our sport. And so, yes, Bob, Greg and I met in December of 18, and he began to learn more about men's volleyball, knew very little about the sport, and upon realizing its tremendous growth trajectory, both in high school and in college, decided that it warranted the attention of his presidents. And in January of 2019, he invited me to present to the SIAC Conference Council of Presidents. So in my world, when you're invited to talk about men's volleyball to a dozen college presidents, that's a good day, right? And so I invited Sharon Clark, who I know was your speaker last week and president of the AVCA, to accompany me to Orlando in January of 19 to make a presentation to those presidents. And they were intrigued, like a lot of college leaders are, about enrollment, about broadening the geographic footprint of their applicant base, which our sport does, and certainly wanted to be on the cutting and front edge of what is now the largest and fastest growing team sport in America for boys high school, and that's boys volleyball. So it was an important first step to meet a commissioner who was progressive, who had made league-wide deals before, and we presented an option whereby if 6 could come in at the same time, to add 6 new D2s all at once, rather than kind of the onesies that we had been doing. Just to put in some context real fast, we've helped start 17 new college programs in 3 years, and those 17 new college men's volleyball programs are now funding 60 scholarships that did not exist before First Point Volleyball Foundation started.
Wow.
And now 6 of those are these 6 HBCUs that are all D2 that decided as a group to come on as a conference so that it could be a sponsored sport by the conference year one. And that has a lot of compelling opportunities along with it as well. And we'll talk about those, I'm sure, a little bit later as it relates to access to the NCAA championship and other things. But a compelling, I think, opportunity to diversify our sport. It hit on 2 of our strategic objectives with diversity and inclusion, as well as collegiate roster opportunities. And now 18 more scholarships to boys of color are now available to attend historically black colleges in America. Really thanks to Greg Moore and his leadership, and then a lot of our donors, Scott and Adrian Stowell, the Andrew Family Foundation, and then lastly, USA Volleyball brought $400,000 to the table, and First Point Volleyball awarded a $600,000 grant, and that was $1 million project to add 6 D2s to the landscape of men's volleyball.
Wow.
Wait, that's great. Now, what is the possibility that these 6 schools, the historically black colleges and universities, will be able to actually start their season next year, or is it going to be postponed for another year?
Yeah, 21-22 will be the first official season. The original discussions, there was a hope to launch in 2021, but even pre-COVID, we knew it was an aggressive timeline to make announcements in the late fall of 2019 and be ready to go. We're recommending and many of you might have conversations to be had with your administrators in your athletics department about the possibility of adding a sport. And we're recommending that decisions are made in the spring, if you can all do so, such that you can hire a coach for a full year, have 2 boys junior nationals to recruit from in a new program before your first season. So, announcing in that October-November timeframe, it was going to be aggressive to be a 2021 official first start. And certainly COVID not allowing those schools to recruit in this, the 1920 school year has added to that. I will say that the grants, that $233,000 of that grant has already been paid to the institutions of the total $1 million, and all of our donors have fulfilled in terms of that grant schedule. So we award grants based on those milestones, right? And so all 6 schools presidents are committed to moving forward with men's volleyball and have made those announcements publicly, and we're really excited about that. I think there's 2 schools that will have students on campus, and I think 5 of the schools will play an abbreviated club season this season in 2021. So there'll be some volleyball played, and there are a number of D2 schools that are already on the schedules of, say, Kentucky State, for example. So, but the official first season with all 6 programs will be 21-22.
Wow. Oh, Bob. We lost Bob. That's all right.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Well,
Hey.
Well,
Yeah.
wait, this is Brian Gimmillaro. I'm next on the show anyway, so let me jump in. First, I have a 2-part question. One is my concern, or what I've heard, is there's a potential of changing the NCAA championship to go back to 4 teams. So let us know something about that. We've heard that. And second is, and it's kind of a disjointed question, but second is, I've worked with a federal program for education at one time, and when the money is gone, once that initial money is gone, what safeguards have you put into place to continue the program? Are there any caveats or any requirements for the universities or the conference to keep the programs? So those are 2 parts.
Sure. Well, maybe we'll start with the second question, because it ties into really all 17 of the schools, including St. Francis Brooklyn, which was the first Division I program to add men's volleyball as a D1 in 18 years, and an important monkey off our back. We're in discussions with a number of other enrollment-driven D1s and some larger A5 institutions as well, where we have seen that philanthropy can drive the increase of more broad-based programming and opportunities, just as philanthropy is often required to add any department at a college, right? But we do ask in those grant agreements that the milestones are met as they add roster spots in over a 2 or 3 year period. But like any donor, we are, and there's an expectation through our grant agreements that funds are used to fulfill the intended purposes of the grants, right? And that there are, to some degree, generous donors and grant makers don't have extraordinarily difficult clawback clauses, but our agreements all have that expectation that funds are used for that intended purpose. It's just a donor bill of rights, basically, right? And then lastly, we tell all of our grant partners that we are their partners and not just an NGB making a Spark grant, that our model is a little bit more like a community foundation, where we want our grant recipients to view the First Point Volleyball Foundation as kind of that aunt or uncle in town, or a family foundation that loves your sport that's local. A community foundation, and our community is men's collegiate volleyball, meaning our grants won't be the size of our first 3 years when the program is just starting, but we encourage them to invite our foundation or our representative to their annual banquet, or to seek our counsel on raising money in an ongoing way. So we can do prospect research to find volleyball friendlies in a community where there's a men's volleyball program, because it's important to us that we preserve those programs too. And so we tend to get involved with advising programs who are looking to raise money from their alumni or their community, or to do an international trip. And so we do a lot of that kind of fundraising consulting, which is my background, by the way, for 20 years as fundraising counsel. So it's more of a long-term partnership. And lastly, it's represented or evidenced by one of the grants we made at Damon College in Buffalo, where we're now partnering with the Buffalo Community Foundation to do a series of 16 clinics at inner city middle schools. And the Damon College coaching staff and those athletes on the men's and women's team are kind of our partners to grow the game. So if you think about a president, particularly at these SIAC schools, that's enrollment driven, and at a max 4.5 scholarships and 18 to 20 men on a roster, this is an enrollment driving operation, a net profit gain to the college. by adding men's volleyball. And then we're involved with them even in discussions now on how those grant makers become our partners to grow the game in places like Columbia, South Carolina, Atlanta, Georgia, Frankfort and Louisville, Kentucky, where Kentucky State is. So they become our partners, and that's the long-term relationship building we do as grant makers with those presidents. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
The other question you asked is about the NCAA Division I Championship Working Group Committee convened over the last 6 months based on some consulting that was done over a couple of years, all pre-COVID, to look at about 10 different sports in detail that have under 50 in sports sponsorship for the Division I National Championship. And we are different in men's volleyball than some of those other programs because some of those other championships aren't combined D1, D2 like we are. But in a way that we get and understand, given what's happened in the world, that finances are important, this working group of administrators set out to make some recommendations, which they did in a draft in writing on the size of all 10 of those championships. In our championship, they did suggest that a guideline might be that if you have under 50 teams that sponsor the sport, that you ought to be at a lesser percentage of sports sponsorship that would qualify for the championship. And in our case, that working group's draft, which we're now responding to, suggested that the championship ought to be reduced from 7 teams to 4. It is our hope that prior to July 10th, when the working group does submit a final draft to the Division I Council, that then would be discussed, and if it continued, it's our hope, and I can talk about some reasons why I'm hopeful that it won't, that would then be voted upon by the D1 Council and potential legislation voting officially in April of 21. It's our hope that it will never get to that point because we think we're already over 50. If you count committed programs to be at Division I and Division II. And as such, the guideline would be 20% if you're over 50 ought to have representation of the sponsorship in the championship. And so arguably we ought to really be talking about now or very soon increasing the championship from 7 to 8 or even 10 if you use this working group's own guidelines. So in closing, and I'm happy to then field a question about it more specifically, we believe that this working group of Division I administrators has been completely unaware of the growth of Division I, Division II, especially Division II, the role that Division II has played in our growth in the game. And so they're looking at numbers that include 45 teams from the 18-19 numbers. We'll be at 48 once the 19-20 numbers are released this next month. And we'll be at 54, within months. So it's our hope that once this working group realizes that there's some unintentional consequences for what would happen if we were to reduce our championship, but that it would probably be unwise to do so in the very year that these changes would go into effect. We'll for sure be over 50, that you wouldn't want to eliminate access to our championship for the entire Division II or to HBCUs. Now's not the time to limit access to a championship from a conference that joined, committed, took grant money, waited until they had 6 ready in hopes to have access to the championship like Conference Carolinas. It's not the time to, I think, deter presidents from encouraging enrollment applications at their colleges, which is what men's volleyball does for these schools. So we're optimistic that we'll have some ears, and we're very appreciative that the working group and the NCAA circulated a draft and asked for our feedback by July 10th. And so we're hopeful that they'll dive in a little bit deeper to all 10 sports and see that we're a growing one, and they might want to think about us a little differently than just what are the 18-19 numbers and let's cut some costs, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm going to now turn it over to Ruth Nelson for the final few questions.
Oh, Wade, my question, we should have started at the beginning because this has to do with fundraising. As a former sports and corporate marketing director for Special Olympics International, which is a 501c3,
Right.
I understand your goals and you being a background with fundraising. How are you sustaining these grants? And now with everything that's going on, how do you continue to keep people interested in either doing a matching fund program within like what you're doing in one of the programs and maintaining some of these other programs that, you know, the HBCU schools that are getting $200,000 a year?
Right. Well, fortunately, we have a unbelievable board that I work with and for, volunteers, 17 of them. And there's some good minds and very generous donors within that group. And then our partners like USA Volleyball, although it's a difficult stretch for USAV and a lot of organizations. So we were glad that on some of those projects, like the Division I and the Division II conference and some others, we had already committed donors who had either fulfilled or have since reaffirmed their fulfillment schedule. So, you know, donors are negatively affected by what's happening in this world. And we're being very sensitive to a lot of conversations of people and families and companies that may not have the perfect timeline. But we're also seeing an enormous amount of philanthropy happen in America. Outside of just our board, we've had $56,000 worth of new contributions since February. And so I think what we're seeing is as we begin to see some line of sight on coming out of this COVID world that we're still in, that people do like to think about things that they care about. And volleyball and our sport is one of those things. And so we've done a couple of things. March 28th, we had a strategic planning board meeting where all 14 of our 17, though it wasn't a mandatory board meeting, gathered for a strategic planning call where we came up with some new strategies for not only just playing offense, creating new programs, but a little bit of defense as well. And we established a system we call First Point Fundraising System. It's kind of a 6-rotation development program. It's not overly novel, but we do it via Zoom as opposed to cultivation opportunities in sort of an AD's boardroom that you might be aware of. But those virtual open gyms, we call them, have been very well received, very well attended with some compelling speakers, and they're leading towards July 23rd, which is our annual day of giving for First Point Volleyball Foundation. So we have a virtual open gym tomorrow where John Sparrow, Micah Christensen, and Jamie and Hartley, a former professional volleyball athlete, are all three of the speakers. firstpointvolleyball.com, Wade at firstpointvolleyball.com if people are interested to either get an invite to that Zoom call. But what we're finding is that people do want to make a difference, and we are calling for alumni of men's volleyball programs to make a difference by giving back to their own programs as well. So the other thing that we've done is we've had a series of conference calls with existing coaches of existing programs to instruct this fundraising system of virtual open Zoom calls, open gym, follow-up, and then kind of a team huddle day of giving so that every single collegiate program is rallying the alumni. And so if any of you are involved with nonprofit volleyball-related organizations, do not hesitate to ask, would be our advice, whether it be a club or a community organization or a local nonprofit or a college program. The alumni and stakeholders of your programs want to know that even during COVID, you're doing something. You're rallying a long-term plan, and that may mean that you are briefing before asking, but it's okay to get a no right now. We're going to get more than we usually do. Fortunately, our existing grant recipients have been matched with donors already in a fulfillment schedule. And then I think we're continuously hearing, and I'm warmed by the fact that we're hearing from administrators, ADs, particularly in the last 30 days, who are hearing from their presidents, hey, find ways to find students. Every dean, every department has to come up with new enrollment. And so I think men's volleyball will continually be viewed as a potential enrollment driver at the Division I level, and we see some more of those D1s coming. So I think when we present compelling, particularly I think Division I opportunities that warrant philanthropic support, then it's actually easier sometimes to go to a high net worth individual because we have something that warrants their attention in the form of a proposal that is an AD that's teed up enough to say, I'll do it if you can match me with some philanthropy. We're engaged heavily in that activity right now.
That's fantastic. Wade, that was wonderful for the viewers to hear that. Now I'm going to Mick because Mick's going to talk a little bit about closing out today and talking about next week's speaker also. But that was wonderful, Wade.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ruth. Wade, I want to mention one thing, though. You and I traveled to Carolina here a little while ago to talk to the NJCAA about adding a national championship for boys volleyball at the junior college level. And I attended one of the sessions that John Foreman, we're on his platform right now, had where he had two junior college women's coaches on, and he asked the question about men's volleyball at their school, and they seemed to be totally unaware that anything was going on for boys volleyball in the NJCAA. We found that a lot of students who are going to four-year schools this fall have decided to, in fact, attend junior colleges for a year or two right now, stay closer to home because of the COVID-19 situation. And when we talked with the NJCAA, they seem to be very, very supportive of an effort that you proposed that sounded really good to me, and I'm really in favor of. Can you fill us in on that kind of quickly?
Sure. Again, we met the leadership of the executive director and board chair of the NJCAA and formed a partnership. They came to one of our board meetings, and then Mick, you and I went to their board meeting in North Carolina. They have decided to wait until summer to do the survey that we agreed to do as a next step, which was timed for March, but with the height of COVID, they decided it'd be better to survey those regions and administrators of junior colleges in the summer. And that summer survey does include, would you have an interest in this sport? And if so, might you be interested in a grant that would help with some of the upfront costs? And so our board approved that offer, so to speak, with grant monies that would be in that survey. And anecdotally, in Pennsylvania and in Michigan, we think that in particular, even coming out of COVID, the need for the kind of things that sports like volleyball does for both enrollment and graduation retention, that there would be some receptivity to. So they believe at the NJCAA that there might be as many as 10 to 30 junior colleges that if they thought there could be a grant to be taken advantage of, that they might very well respond favorably to this opportunity. The NJCAA did approve that if they had a minimum amount of colleges that would be part of that junior college championship, that they would lessen the 3-year waiting period for it to be a championship sport, so that the NJCAA would sponsor it day one. So I think it's a really cost-effective way for a young man to get a volleyball opportunity, perhaps the least expensive in America right now. It warrants our attention, and it's my hope we help make that happen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That's pretty exciting. Being a former junior college men's coach and women's coach, that's right back to my heart. So I'm excited to hear that. We're running out of time here, so I want to announce who we're going to be talking to next week. This has been wonderful. Next week, we will have Lindsay Atkinson, Director of Sports, National High School Federation, on. She's going to talk to us about what is happening now with COVID-19 and high school volleyball for this coming fall. And again, valuable information, just like Wade gave to us today. Lindsay will hopefully be providing us with some of the same stuff. So thanks so much, and back to you, Ruth.
Here we go. A special shout out to all those coaches that have attended one of the Championship Skills Series clinics over the past year. For those interested in hosting a virtual clinic this fall, or an in-person clinic on 2021, please contact us at www.volleyballmastercoaches.com. Watch for the upcoming series, Journey of the Legends. That will have feature interviews with Master Coaches Mick, Brian, Bob, and Ruth. Follow us next week on Master Coaches on Facebook as Volleyball Master Coaches, Instagram and Twitter, VB Master Coaches. Now, let's go back to our special host who's been waiting today to update you on his coaching conversations. John?
Thanks, Ruth. Thanks, Wade, for coming out for this session and everybody for attending. I've got coming up actually a continuation in a part of this topic of college men's volleyball. I'll have two coaches tomorrow at noon Eastern who coach both men's and women's at their colleges. One in Division II, one in Division III. So that should be an interesting conversation. You can find out more details on that either on my Twitter at CoachingVB, at my website, coachingvb.com, or on the Facebook page, Coaching Volleyball. So thanks everybody for turning up. Hopefully see you either tomorrow on the conversation or next week on the next buzz.